Hi, everyone. I am Barb Collura, and welcome to Resolve's Kitchen Table Conversations. This is a digital series that is hosted by Resolve, the National Infertility Association, and it really brings back the nostalgia of our founder, a woman named Barbara Eck, who founded Resolve around her kitchen table. She started the first support group in the early 1970s, and that led to the founding of Resolve in 1974. She brought women together to share their family building experiences, and they all supported and helped each other. So we're really proud to carry on this tradition through our nationwide network of support groups and through this web series that we tackle really important topics for our community. And today's kitchen table conversation is doing just that. I have an amazing group gathered, and I'm excited to get the conversation started. So today, we are going to be talking about infertility support among faith-based communities. And we have assembled a fantastic panel, but it's not really a panel. Think of us around your kitchen table, and we're just going to talk about this issue. Joining me is Aisha. She is from Mind Body Revival Coach. She's going to tell you a little bit about herself. Aisha, give a little wave there. We also have Gila, and she is an executive director of Yesh Tikva, and she's going to tell us about her journey and why she started this organization. We also have Reverend Rob Keithan, and Reverend Rob is going to share a little bit about what brings him to the table today. And then last but not least is Reverend Elizabeth Hagen, an author and faith leader who's also going to share a little bit about what brings her to the table. So I am going to ask each of you, if you would, tell us about yourself and why you're here and what brings you to this table today to talk about infertility and the faith-based community. So I am going to start with Aisha. If you could tell us where you are, and I know you're over the pond, but let us know what brings you here today.
So hi everyone, my name is Aisha and I'm the founder of Mind Body Revival Coach. And what brings me here today is because around 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with infertility. For many years, I was misdiagnosed because I had stage 4 endometriosis. And the next 10 years looked like many failed rounds of IVF and many miscarriages. And then in 2019, it was my last and final pregnancy through fertility treatment. And then I decided to embrace my child-free after infertility life.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey. Gila, if you would share about yourself and what brings you here today.
Hi, I'm Gila, and I am here because I too was diagnosed with infertility about 10 years ago with unexplained infertility. And after many years of treatment, I hit rock bottom and needed a faith-based community of support to help pick me off the floor so that I could continue through my journey. And starting with a little around my kitchen table as well, our first support group, Yesh Tikva, was founded to offer emotional support to women like me and men who were experiencing infertility and needed a lens of religion to support them through that journey with others who understood what it meant to feel isolated and alone in their experiences. And I'm honored to be here today. A huge fan of Resolve.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here. Reverend Rob, what brings you here today?
Hi, yes, I'm Reverend Rob Keith, and I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister, and part of my ministry has always been working with faith leaders, lay and ordained, to provide non-judgmental, kind of full spectrum pastoral care on reproductive challenges and loss, to make sure that people get the support that they need And along the way, my wife and I ran into our own struggles with infertility, and I found myself sort of turning some of my teaching on myself and looking for resources and really not finding a lot. And in my ministry, talking with pastors and ministers and rabbis around the country, infertility is one of the very first things that they name when we ask what people in their congregations are coming to them with. So there's a real need out there for more resources like this conversation and others. So I'm here both professionally and personally, like so many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And Reverend Elizabeth Hagen, tell us why you're here today.
I'm glad to be here amongst these amazing faith leaders. I am a local church pastor. I'm ordained in the American Baptist tradition. I've been a minister for the past 15 years, and I found myself in my own infertility journey many years ago and was very disheartened by the response that I got from my own faith tradition. I felt like it was something that nobody wanted to talk about as I struggled and as I sought resources. And as a result of that, I became an author that shared what I needed during that time, which was a open, honest dialogue type book that explained what it's like to long for a child. And so I wrote our infertility story called Birth, Finding Grace Through Infertility, all while I was pastoring a church. And then, I'm really concerned about the language and the theology, especially in my own Christian tradition, that we place on those who are walking through this struggle. And I think we can do a lot of damage in our faith context that keep people away from the resources they need to find support. And so I recently wrote this book, Birth. I wrote Birth, but then I wrote this book, Brave Church, about how to tackle tough conversations. And one of those that's near and dear to my heart is infertility. And so I'm hopeful that as we keep having conversations like we're having today, that people, no matter what their faith tradition is, that they will feel less alone and less judged by their choices.
Wow, what an incredible group. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for your desire to help others, and not only to help others who are going through this, but also to help other leaders. It's really incredible to hear that. So I'm just going to throw this question out here because, people who haven't gone through, well, let me just start by saying infertility, what we know about infertility. There's data about how many people it impacts and how many children in the United States are born through assisted reproductive technologies. But the data we have, which we don't believe is fully complete in terms of the full number, but it states that 1 in 8 or 12% of people of reproductive age experience trouble conceiving or carrying a pregnancy to term. So that's a term we use, 1 in 8 here at Resolve. We believe it could be even higher than that. And so if you think about, gee, do I know 8 people? Do I encounter 8 people? How many people fill my church faith community every week, every month? And that's the prevalence of it. So it's not something that that we should ignore. The problem is, the reason why you're probably sitting there wondering, how could it be 1 in 8? I know a lot of people and no one's ever told me. It's because many of us feel very stigmatized and silent and feel alone. And so we are not shouting from the rooftops. I'm from Minnesota, and we have something called, people bring you a potluck, right? If you have some sort of crisis in your family, you bring food. And no one's bringing you food when you announce you have infertility, because you're not announcing it and you're not posting it. And so you don't get that sense of real support and community from your family, friends, work colleagues, that sort of thing. So that's why so many of us have organizations, and why we've reached out to organizations to help us on our journey. So I'm going to throw a question out there, and I want you to think about your own faith communities. Is there something unique about infertility and family building challenges that makes this particularly important for faith communities to address? Just jump right in. Gila,
If no one else is going to, I'll jump in. I definitely do think so. I think that a big piece of living in a faith-based community is being a part of the community, and being part of being part of many religious communities means being a part of a family, and a family that revolves primarily around children and rituals. And specifically, I can speak for the Jewish community. So much of our religion is based on ritual that revolves around family.
Wow.
And family lifestyle, down to our weekly attendance of synagogue. You come as a family, there are programming for family, prayer services a lot of times include walking through this sea of strollers just to enter a sanctuary. So your haven, your safe space is first met by a trigger.
Wow.
So there is so much of religious experience and this desire to also want to continue the religion and pass it on to the next generation, which comes with pressure from family, intentionally or unintentionally. And especially I think as Jews, as so much of the ritual that we have speaks about passing it on to your children, that a lot of clergy stand up and speak about that. So you're sitting in your safe haven, and all of a sudden the conversation isn't just about you as an individual and God, but it's about you as a parent or a future parent and God. And if you're struggling, who are you? Do you belong in that space? And how do we make space for you? Because it's not a but, it's an and. It's a yes and. Yes, you with the family belong, but also you, the 1 and 8, belong here. And so how do we make conversation that makes room for the 7 and 8, but also makes room for the 1 and 8? And I think that on so many levels, that adds so many triggers to the journey.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think within my community personally, there are 2 issues here. So one is definitely faith-based, but the other issue is very cultural. So for example, I'm half South Asian, and many of the thoughts and some of the words and some of the way people speak is very based around culture and not faith. And sometimes that can be very intertwined, and people can misinterpret culture for faith. So I know in Islam specifically, it comes in one chapter in the Quran. In Arabic, it's Al-Nisa, which is a chapter called the Women, and in it says, God will give to whom He wills. So we know faith-wise, it's nobody's fault. Infertility is not something that anyone is because someone did or didn't do. But the problem is culturally, there's this big emphasis on family building, and a lot of the time our grandparents had lots of children. My dad has a huge family, lots of brothers and sisters. So automatically when you get married, there's a very strong emphasis on, well, you need to get pregnant quickly and naturally. So I think there are 2 issues here. I think some of our leaders need to speak more openly about topics that are taboo. And currently I feel like that doesn't happen. Not just about infertility, I still think things like divorce or not being able to get married, or chronic illness, I think they're topics that are still highly stigmatized. So I think we need to work together with, leaders and have a dialogue and ask them to talk openly about things that actually affect, modern day Muslim, Jewish, Christian women or men.
Yeah, Rob and Elizabeth, anything you want to add on that conversation? And why, is this a unique situation with infertility?
Well, I think infertility connects with faith communities because often when people are in a place of crisis, it's their faith community that they go to seek answers for, no matter what their tradition is. When something bad is happening, I know we're going to get into this later, but, we begin to ask questions like, why me? Why God? Where is God in this deep, painful thing that's happening? And, we turn to our sacred text, we turn to our traditions. And, if those are places that don't make room for us and our questions and try to give us very direct answers, of like, if your life was in line, then you would have a baby, or you wouldn't go through this time of trial or suffering. I mean, I think it's a theological issue of how we deal with suffering and pain and loss and who we think God is, that make these conversations complicated, but why people turn to faith communities in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it kind of as a both and that there are some very particular things related to infertility and family that religious communities focus on and make more difficult. And because infertility is something that is related to sex, it is thus a difficult conversation for religious communities to engage in, because frankly, there's been a lot of harm done around sex and sexuality and bodies by the religious community. And so people fear judgment. They fear talking about their private lives. They fear that their religious leaders are not going to be there for them. And even if you're in a religious community where that is not actively happening anymore, there's still such a cultural momentum behind it, that fear is really socialized in. And so in order for us to get beyond that, religious leaders and religious communities really need to be proactive about countering it. And that if your clergy person or religious leader hasn't sort of proactively welcomed conversations about this or not, people, I think, are going to be hesitant.
Well, so I'm just going to throw something out there because I'm an activist. So I'm sitting here listening to all of you, and I'm wondering, is it that we really need to spend a lot more time and energy with faith leaders creating environments that are more conducive for the 1 in 8, as I love how Gila said, there's the 7 and 8 and the 1 in 8, or is it really upon us as people who are trying to follow our faith, right, and are going through this, for us to reach out to our faith leaders and say, hey, can we create a more welcoming in place? So I don't know. I mean, I think it's both, but is there a chicken and egg? Is there one that should come first? Because I'm sensing that the faith leaders, and Elizabeth, this is probably, you're like, hello, Barb, this is why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Like, I think they need a lot of help, but not help because they're bad people, but help, Gila, because they don't know, they're not aware of this. Like, is that a fair statement? What do you see in the Jewish faith? Are rabbis aware of this, or is this something that they could use help in learning more about it?
I definitely think that it goes to all 7 and 8. I think it's very hard. And as Aisha pointed out, there's so many struggles that people experience. And that it's very hard when you're not experiencing that specific struggle to fully understand the scope of it. And I could tell you, as someone who is supporting other people, I make mistakes and I say things that are insensitive. And I was called out on it this morning of saying something to someone in struggle. And they said, listen, what you said was triggering. And still, even like in this space, I got defensive because I meant to be supportive. My intentions behind that comment was supportive, yet it triggered. And so I don't think that clergy aren't capable and aren't aware. I think many of them just haven't experienced it. And so I think the question is, how do we help someone experience it without physically going through it, so that they could come to understand what it means? And also, I think it comes down to empathy also. I think that at the end of the day, we don't need them to sympathize. We need them to be able to take a step back and say, I don't get it, but I see that you're in pain. So talk to me and tell me about it, because I've never been there. Tell me what I could do. And I think that we've come a long way as a fertility community. I could say, like, in the 10 years that I've been personally involved in the fertility community, when I was first diagnosed, there was nothing. There was no conversation being had, barely in the communities. in the religious-based communities. And the level of conversation that's being had today, though it's not where we'd love to see it, it's starting, it's there.
Good.
Even on social media, the conversation happening
Yeah.
is amazing.
Rob and Elizabeth, what do you think? Is it how do we support faith leaders more about this? What could we be doing as organizations, but what could we be doing as just the followers, right?
Yeah, the good news is I think many are happy and willing to do more. They just don't know what to do, or it hasn't sort of gotten on their priority list. And the reality is that, most clergy will take like a class or maybe two on pastoral care, but there's a low chance that it focuses on infertility in particular. They're just general classes. And when you're out pastoring a congregation, like most of the clergy I know are really, really busy. So you pay attention to the things that are right in front of you. And if you don't have someone coming to you, you're not going to prioritize additional training or proactively including this in sermons or not, if it's not prioritized. And I think so it is a both and, is that,
right,
that there's organizations that can continue to work with the religious leaders and say, like, you need to name this proactively. And the more congregants that are coming forward,
right,
the more it puts it on their clergy's radar screens.
Absolutely. And, I say I wrote Brave Church. I didn't write Brave Pastor or Brave Clergy, because it really does take everyone. And as more of us begin to take small steps, which is what I'm hoping continues to be a movement among Christian churches with this book, of people getting together in small groups and beginning to just, baby steps toward, yeah, I went through infertility, or yes, I had a miscarriage, or yes, family planning has been hard for me. And, I think minds are blown, right? Because we begin to hear more and more about how it's so present in our communities, and we had no idea. One interesting, I think, misconception, and I found this when I was on my book tour with Birth, my first book, was that I had clergy that assumed that it would not be welcome in their parish because they didn't have enough, quote, young people in their parish. And it's just a youthful topic, or someone who's in childbearing age. But what happened to me, which was so surprising, but I was so thankful to have the experience, where there were women in their 60s who were coming up to me and saying, I went through all this pain and my infertility was never resolved. Or I was one of the first patients who went through IVF in the US, and I now have my son because of that. But, when I came back to my faith community and said I was pregnant, I really wanted to talk about that experience with those who were, I knew and were so important to me, but I felt like I couldn't say that because I felt like I was going to be judged. And so I think we need to recognize, as clergy and as people who are connected to faith communities, that there is pain that is present. And even if we don't see it, it may not be always in the demographic that we think it's present in, and that there's stories that are just begging to be heard, if we just make space to be honest about how we've all struggled with lives that have not gone the direction maybe that we would have planned.
Yeah, I mean, I think just this community support. So if somebody is listening to this and they're feeling like their faith community is maybe not as, they're not feeling supported by their faith community, I'd love to hear each one of you. What advice would you give to that person if they said, hey, I've been a part of this faith community, and now that I'm dealing with this infertility battle, I'm not comfortable. What should I do? What would you say? Aisha, what would you say?
I just want to go back to the point that you
Absolutely,
were saying about us kind of maybe being the ones to approach kind of our leaders or community leaders. And I think the problem is where I'm based, there are sister circles that you can go to, because men and women do things very separately a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. And, in these sister circles, sometimes they don't talk about things that are really important, like infertility. And my sister-in-law, she had cancer at a very young age. She had a stillborn. And I remember she was telling me she went to the sister circle and she went up to the lady who runs it. So her husband's an imam. She's an alima, which means she's educated in Islamic studies. And my sister-in-law was saying to her, look, why don't you do other topics like, cancer, or, someone having a stillborn or a miscarriage? And she almost looked at my sister-in-law in disgust, as if to say, well, how can we talk about these things? And she did actually say, look, I don't think these subjects would be welcomed. And that was around 5 years ago. Wow. So things haven't changed that much. And I feel like sometimes when you speak out about things, other people within the community will see you as a troublemaker, rather than thinking that you're a person who's trying to support people who are isolated, who are dealing with things that no one in your community is talking about or willing to talk about. And I can't remember ever hearing, I'm 41 now, I can't ever remember hearing a talk in my community about infertility, miscarriage, baby loss, or anything of that kind. And I think that, while I can hear a lot of progress in like all of your communities, we still have so much work to do. I don't even know that many Instagram accounts who are, Islamic faith-based, apart from mine. And a few others.
How has, with you doing that, with you being so open, and I don't mean to, put you on the spot here, but in just a short answer, has that impacted you negatively at all by you being brave and coming out and talking about this?
It's actually really funny about that. I have so many Muslim women DM me privately. They will look at my posts, they won't comment or like them, but they will DM me, which is absolutely fine. But even the accounts that are on there on Instagram, who are like Muslim women, most of them are anonymous because they don't feel like they can actually show their faces because of shame, stigma, embarrassment. So, and like I said before, there's a double-edged sword here, because part of that is to do with culture, and the other part is the fact that our religious leaders and our religious community aren't talking about these things. And I feel like that's such a shame, because we should have people out there that look like us, that we feel like we can relate to and go to. Why shouldn't we? Having infertility is not shameful for me. It's a medical condition. I don't have children. I'm not ashamed about that. But even being child-free after infertility, like I am, that's still stigmatized. That still has a lot to do with it.
Right. So, anybody else want to comment? I just, in case there's something running the tip of your tongue. All right.
Can I add in?
Yeah, please.
I think that goes back also to something that Rob was saying, is that it's so part of sex and sexuality, because essentially that's for the 7 and 8, that is where their families are created. And for us 1 and 8 who are now taking our sex lives and moving it into a reproductive endocrinology practice, you're taking something that essentially, especially in religion, is taught to be so private, so sacred, so holy. And you're now bringing someone else into that, and not just someone. You got your doctors, your nurses, regular monitoring, and now you need to bring your community, your clergy into a conversation that if you're 7 and 8 is never there. And so I think a big question here also is, how do we separate infertility from sex? Because at that point, it no longer is necessarily that private space, but it still is shrouded by that stigma of secrecy. And how do we make space for people to feel that they can maintain their privacy and dignity while still being able to share on some level?
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm a Protestant clergy, but I am in touch with many of my Catholic friends, and there's so much of a struggle, from the lens of approval of choices related to what types of fertility treatments you might have, because there's ethical or moral judgments made by religious leaders about what things are appropriate and what things are not. And so much so that people feel like they have to hide if they go against their clergy or their religious teaching in a Catholic setting, that they feel like they can't show up as themselves, or they can't talk about how their child was conceived or what that looks like. And you don't want to do anything that goes against, if someone has a faith belief, you want to respect that. But at the same point, I just know that there are so many who are suffering because they don't feel like they can be honest about what they discern is right for them and their family because of the judgment that religious leaders offer their choices.
Well, I mean, Rob and Gila, this whole notion of sex and so forth. Wow. I mean, is that what's making this so taboo? I know we have so much still to talk about, but I want to just pose a couple of more quick questions, and then we're gonna have to wrap this up. So I'm also part of a faith community. I went through infertility. My husband and I had tried medical treatment. It did not work, and we chose to build our family through adoption. And I remember, I can still see the page. It was a article. I'm not even sure who wrote it, and it was published in a Resolve publication, and it was called "Why Me, God?" And it hit me at just the time when I needed it, and I remember just feeling that so viscerally, so strongly. Why am I going through this? And I'm sure people say that with a cancer diagnosis and any other kind of mental health crisis or anything in their life. So I'm not saying infertility or mine was any worse, but thinking about that struggle. I'd love each of you to, if a friend, if somebody in your congregation came to you and said that to you about this, what would you say?
I know for me, I would probably pull out one of my favorite quotes from a theologian named Frederick Buechner, which says, "Here's the world, terrible and beautiful things will happen. Do not be afraid." And I think for me, it's that we have to get comfortable with our relationship with being a human being, which is that we're not going to have a life where everything always goes according to our plans or our wishes, or there is not pain or suffering a part of the human experience. And I believe that God is present with someone for whom is experiencing pain or suffering or longing that's not fulfilled. And I think we can do great things to sit with people in their pain and make space for that, as much as we make space for celebration. And so why God? I don't know. And I really don't know. I don't know why infertility happened to me. I don't know why it happened to all of you who are on this panel. But I do know that we can make beautiful things that come out of our pain. And that, that begins with helping others feel less alone and being a presence of light and hope to those in whom we're in community with. So that's where I would start, Barb.
Awesome. Rob?
Yeah, I think, I think the pandemic has really highlighted this, is that most of what we come to think of as things we control are actually an illusion of things that we can control. That, things happen in the future, and we think that, there's a logical path to them, but in reality, our lives could be completely disrupted at any moment by a bazillion different things. It just typically doesn't happen. So people sort of move forward. And this is a moment that shatters the illusion of control. And I think folks are going to need to go through their own process of letting go of that and of figuring out what they can control and what they can't, and then claiming some power and authority over what they can control. And some of it, I like that phrase of like coming to terms with what it is to be human, to be imperfect, to be limited, and that everyone's going to need to go through that journey and then sort of regain dignity. And I would say, some people are not going to have a great experience talking to their religious leaders about this for whatever reason, and that recognizing that every person deserves support on this, and it's nobody's fault, and that you have to claim that dignity and worth for yourself, even if others won't give it to you. It's still yours, and you're the only one who owns it, and ultimately you're the only one who can give it to yourself in the long run.
Gila?
Yeah, all these comments are really resonating. I think that an interesting thing, and I'm not sure that this is per se religious based, and I struggle with the concept of why me till this day, trying to figure out the meaning. I think that on some level, the question isn't always necessarily why is this happening to me, because there really is no answer. We don't understand why God does what God does. But I think that for finding some, if we're looking for meaning through it, is maybe asking, what does God want me to see through this process? How can I connect through it to God, to others in suffering, whether it's directly the one in aid or it's an empathy that is instilled in us when we experience grief in our own lives. I think that it's really interesting. I was just recently listening to a Brene Brown podcast, and she was talking about hope and what does hope mean. And contrary to our understanding of what hope is like hanging on to this belief that if I ask God, if I struggle in that relationship with him and beg for it, I will get what I want out of it. It's through suffering and through that resilience that we learn to build hope. And so hope actually comes through the grief. It comes through the struggle and coming out through it and surviving it, and that we build that resilience and that hope to continue to persevere through life. And so I don't know that there necessarily ever is going to be an answer to the why me, but I definitely know that many of us struggle with it, including myself to this day.
Wow, beautiful. Aisha, can you close us out on this why me, God question?
I don't know if I can top what any of you said.
Yeah.
But, that was just brilliantly said by each one of you. I mean, for me, I would start with saying basically what it isn't. So I would say to someone, it's not your fault. God's not punishing you. It's not because you didn't pray hard enough. It's not because you're not a nice person, because sometimes there are people out there who aren't that nice, that have many children. So I personally just don't believe that. So I would say that to the person that was coming to me and asking me why me. And also I think just telling them that grief and gratitude can coexist. I think sometimes faith-based community, we can, focus on the gratitude quite a lot, be thankful for this, you have this, but not that, it's fine, just keep hoping and praying and, having that faith. But I think it's also important for the person to explore their grief, and they're allowed to be sad about a sad situation. So I would probably comfort them with that. I know from an Islamic perspective, we're supposed to look at trials as something where, in the next life, God will elevate your status. So anything you're experiencing here, this is a very temporary life, we believe. So in the next life, you're going to have something even more amazing, So I would probably approach it with that lens, but not kind of religious toxicity. And yeah, I just think many other things what everyone else said as well. But really basing it on it, it's not their fault. Like it really isn't a punishment.
So I'm going to give the listeners some resources. How do people find each of you? And do you have any great resources? Obviously, if you're affiliated with an organization, tell us, or any other resources that you know about. Rob or Elizabeth, you want to start? How do people find you if you want to be found? And then any resources that you know of that you want to make sure people are aware of. Elizabeth, you shared your 2 books. How do people find you?
So if you want to connect with me, it's elizabethhagen.com. If you want to learn more about Brave Church, elizabethhagen.com/Brave Church. And my real hope for Brave Church is that it is a reconciliation tool that a person, for example, who's experiencing fertility could, if they don't feel like their pastor is educated in the topic, they don't feel like they're being heard, or, you know, they just preached a sermon that just triggered them, that they could, which has happened to all of us, that they could take Brave Church, you know, maybe their church doesn't feel brave enough to do the book, but they could take it to their pastor and say, would you read this?
Got it.
And that they would, from that experience, my greatest hope is that people would feel more seen and more heard.
Awesome.
And that's what so many of us are looking for in our faith leaders. So that's how you find me.
Awesome. Rob?
And I'm pleased to say that I have been working with Resolve on a resource for the Resolve website, targeted at pastoral caregivers. And I would commend that once it's up, and y'all can find me through that. And I hope to continue cataloging more resources that are available out there as it grows. And it's great to learn about all the good things that my colleagues here are doing.
Aisha, how do people find you?
So my website is www.mindbodyrevivalcoach.com. I'm also on Instagram at mindbodyrevival_coach. And recently I was a co-author for the book We Are 1 in 8, which is on Amazon. You can find the link in my bio. And also I was a contributor to the book Infertility Doesn't Care About Your Ethnicity. And in there's many writers from Black women, Asian women, and Jewish women. And I provide one-to-one coaching, and I write articles, and I also speak. So come and connect with me.
Awesome. Great. Gila, how do people find you?
Our website is yeshtikva.org, YESHTIKVA.org, and on Instagram, yesh_tikva. And thank you so much. This really, truly was an incredible experience to get to hear from other faith leaders, and to hear that as a 1 in 8, you always feel alone because you're the one. But knowing that in a religious space, that there are other religions that have similar struggles, makes you feel less lonely.
Right. You know, I think we could continue this, and I know Elizabeth and I have had some conversations about how do we get into the seminaries and you know, go on the road with this kind of topic, but there's just so much to explore. If you go to Resolve's website, resolve.org, we have a section called support. And if you look at that, there is content on the intersection between religion and infertility. And we have a lot of resources, links to other organizations, articles. As Reverend Rob has mentioned, he's drafted some content for us. So please, again, resolve.org, and go to our support section. This has been such an amazing conversation. I want to thank all of you so much. I want to thank the people who are going to be viewing this. And for those of you who might be new to Resolve, we invite you to check out our website. As I mentioned, it's resolve.org. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere else in between. If you found this helpful, you can volunteer, you can support our organization, any of these organizations as well, charitable organizations, all need your support. And I'm very excited to have you following Resolve and listening to this topic, and let us know if there's other topics you would like to see us address. I want to thank you all again, Gila, Aisha, Reverend Rob, Reverend Elizabeth. Fantastic content here today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.